Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We begin with Allah's blessed name. We praise Him and we glorify Him as He ought to be praised and glorified. And we pray for peace and for blessings on all His noble messengers, and in particular on the last of them all, the blessed Prophet Muhammad. Allah's blessings be upon him as we greet you from my native island of Trinidad in the Caribbean, from the hall of the Jamia Masjid Jamia in the city of San Fernando in Trinidad, with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is today the 16th day of the month of Safar in the year 1445, and I think it's the 3rd, is it the 3rd of September? Yeah, the 3rd of September. I'm losing count now of the English, the Gregorian calendar, because I'm paying more attention to the Hijri calendar. And it is today the 16th day of the month of Safar in the year 1445, and I want to record today. It's the first time I'm doing a recording since I lectured in Rotterdam more than 1 month ago. I want to offer you a travelogue. This is going to be a video travelogue. I don't have the time to write a new travelogue. Explaining to you and recalling to you the events of the last 6 months of travel. I left Trinidad in mid-February and I returned almost in mid-August. And during this time of 6 months of traveling, without a wife, it was difficult. I fell ill twice. The possibility of a return of pneumonia until my wife in Trinidad asked me to return home and rest for a while before I can resume travel. During this time, I also fasted for the month of Ramadan. The whole of Ramadan was spent in Britain for the first time in my life. Several important topics were taken up during these 6 months in different cities of Britain, but perhaps the most important topic of all was that which was delivered in perhaps the month of February in the Islamic Center, the hall of the Islamic Center in the suburb of Glasgow in Scotland, in which I took up and grappled with that very serious topic, an Islamic eschatological explanation of the origin and destiny of modern Western civilization. If it is possible for a Christian eschatologist to do the same, or a Jewish, or a Hindu, or a Buddhist, I would be very happy to listen to what they have to say. And this, however, was our Islamic eschatological explanation. And of course, if it is Islamic, it must come not from my hat. No. It must come primarily from the Book of Allah, the Quran, and secondarily from the Hadith, to the extent that the Hadith is in harmony with the Quran. I may have to write a book on that subject, inshallah. My audience in Scotland was a almost exclusively educated audience, and they received the lecture with respect, and that was something I welcome. I believe that I must repeat this lecture in several other cities, inshallah, when I resume travel. Another important lecture was delivered in the city of Edinburgh, also in Scotland, but perhaps because of not proper advertising of the lecture, we did not have such a good audience. Very few people attended. But that topic was also of supreme importance. What is the model of scholarship? What is the model of religious scholarship if you are to study the end time? It cannot be conventional scholarship. It cannot be the classical model of scholarship, whether it be Christian or Jew or Hindu or Buddhist or Muslim. The model of scholarship for Akhir Zaman comes from Suratul Kahf, from someone I fondly refer to as Mr. Green. And my Christian scholar brother, Mika, says to me, Sheikh Imran, your Mr. Green, or Khidr alayhi salam, resembles in every way the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary. Khidr alayhi salam, that there is that scholarship which is externally acquired, and there is that scholarship which is internally received. And it is at Majma'ul Bahrain, the place where these two oceans of knowledge meet and are harmoniously integrated. Scholarship that is externally acquired and scholarship that is internally received through Nur from above. When these two oceans of knowledge are integrated harmoniously, that is the model of scholarship for Akhir Zaman. And that was our topic in Edinburgh, so important a topic we have to repeat it in other parts of the world. I then drove from Glasgow, it was about 4 hours drive, to the northern city of Scotland called Inverness. I've been there several times. Here in Trinidad, we have a little village called Inverness, not far from San Fernando. I don't know how they got that name, but I gave a lecture in the masjid in Inverness, and then I was rewarded that my host in Inverness and someone else, they took me for a whole day of driving in the Scottish Highlands, all around the mountains and valleys until we reached to the sea where there was a British naval base. An entire day. We saw the Scottish Highland goats and the Scottish Highland cattle and so on. We saw many hamlets, villages all around. It was a very interesting, exciting experience, but also very tiring. And then it was time for me to fly from Inverness to Manchester, and we realized that it was sometimes cheaper to rent an apartment, a furnished apartment, than to take a hotel room. That's what my daughter got for me. A nice one-bedroom apartment in Manchester. I was so comfortable and happy, and it was cheaper than a hotel room. I spent some time then in Manchester and gave a lecture in the city of Nelson, about maybe an hour's drive from Manchester. And then it was time for my return to Birmingham just before Ramadan for that crucially important lecture that everybody was waiting for. The hall that we rented had a capacity for 400, and we probably had about 450 or more people who registered for that lecture. It was an Islamic eschatological analysis of the Russia-Ukraine war. And it attracted a very large gathering for that lecture. And we went to the Quran, first of all, to find out what is the place of Russia and Ukraine in the eschatology of the Quran. We don't have the time now to repeat that subject for you, but if you have not viewed that lecture, I urge you to do please go and listen to it again, because there's very important analysis from the Quran on the Russia-Ukraine war. You'll be surprised of what the Quran has to say. It was a time of Ramadan, and I was in London, and I had a surprise that a Christian from the Balkans, I can't remember if it was Bosnia or Croatia or Slovenia, but he flew from the Balkans to London to meet with me. I said to him, it's going to be the beginning of Ramadan, so we're going to have to go out and have dinner after breaking the fast. So he decided he's going to fast with me in accordance with our law of fasting. This was the way a Christian showed his respect, his affection, his love for us. And in fact, instead of having one evening, one dinner, we did it twice in a Turkish restaurant. And it was a very interesting dialogue between me and that Christian visitor from the Balkans. This is what happens when you use wisdom to teach the Quran, not a boxing match. Let me repeat that. This is what happens when you use wisdom to teach the Quran rather than a nasty boxing match. I had another visitor during Ramadan, and this was a Hindu from India. And he said he is vegetarian, so we had to search for a vegetarian restaurant, and there were a number of brothers who wanted to join with me for that dinner. The vegetarian dinner was very tasty, very good, and we had a very friendly exchange of views. I have spoken previously about the visit of the Hindu from India. I don't need to return to that yet. It was time for me to go to, after Ramadan, I went to Belgium. We had a dinner organized in a restaurant, and we had many sisters, we had many brothers, and I was able to have a social evening with them. I was moving from table to table, meeting each of them individually. And then we had a public lecture at a hall in Belgium, in Brussels, before I went on to Rotterdam. And in Rotterdam, over a period of one weekend, I believe, no, more than that, 6 days, I gave 6 lectures in Rotterdam. And we had students coming from Germany, from France, from Belgium, and other places. And that center in Rotterdam has now become very dear to me in my heart because they welcome me. A masjid in Rotterdam that is so welcoming and which defies all those who say, no, close your doors on Imran Hussein. I then went from Rotterdam to The Hague, and there we had a dinner, no public lecture, we had a dinner in a restaurant, and I was able to share the evening with my dear brother who studied with me at the Alimi Institute of Islamic Studies, Sheikh Ali Mustafa Sinpal from Suriname. I also interviewed him while I was in The Hague. And then I went from The Hague. They drove me to Amsterdam to take the flight to Geneva. I had lived in Geneva for 5 years as a student, like a second home to me. But Geneva is not very hospitable to me for lecturing. So a French scholar wanted to interview me, and we went to a Muslim halal restaurant close to the Palais des Nations, and I was interviewed over there, and we had lunch together. And then my brother, the scholar, the Christian scholar of the Gospel, my brother Mika, he then took me to Neo, up the lake, where I spent the night at the home of an Iranian student of mine. And the next day, an Albanian student of mine in Zurich. I had never met him before. He drove from Zurich to pick me up. And then we drove to Lausanne, where I met another student of mine from Luzon who was married to an Indonesian and who flew back from Indonesia to meet me in Luzon and brought some cigars for me. We had coffee together, and then I drove to Zurich. And I got a surprise of my life in Zurich. It's the first time I'm lecturing in Zurich. And a young man from Africa, he was the one who took the initiative. And he found a masjid. And he organized a lecture in the masjid. And I was absolutely astonished when I arrived at the masjid that it was packed to capacity. But we did not make arrangements for a running translation of my lecture in German and in Arabic. As a consequence, maybe 1/3 of those present who did not know English, they left. And I was left with the other 2/3. But the masjid was so pleased with that lecture, in which I was teaching the methodology for recitation of the Quran, that they want me to come back, and they say, next time, Sheikh, we get you a bigger masjid. I then left Zurich and went up northwest probably, to the town of Sevelen, which is close to the border with Liechtenstein. And there a Jewish family with about 8 children, one of the girls became Muslim, and then her sister became Muslim. And these 2 Jewish girls, when they became Muslims, they were very, very, very careful of living the Islamic way of life. So one sister said, no, you're not going to stay in a hotel, you're going to stay in our home. Her husband would be at the home. And they organized a lecture for me in a hall in a place called, I think it was called Bush probably. And then I spent another few days with the other sister whose husband was Turkish, and they took me on a riverside picnic. I then flew back from Switzerland to London, and this was the beginning of June, and I had another lecture in Birmingham. I've forgotten now what was the topic. And we also lectured in Bulgaria. I flew to Bulgaria. I could not get a visa for Macedonia, so I went instead to Bulgaria, to the southern part of Bulgaria next to Greece, and that's where the Muslims are living. There were 2 small towns called Smuljam and Rudizem, beautiful towns about 4,000 feet above the sea level, with pine trees all over, beautiful towns. And there in 8 days I gave 7 lectures in a hall attached to the hotel where I was staying. And some of the imams of that area came to attend the lectures. And what I did was to prepare myself for a lecture I had to give in Birmingham on the return of the Messiah and implications of that return. So in preparation for that, I taught this subject in Bulgaria and enjoyed my stay in Bulgaria. They took me up into the mountains for lunch. Someone invited me to a house at the top of a mountain, beautiful view in Bulgaria. I also did some shopping, and then we drove, 5 of us, by car. We left at 9 in the morning, and we reached to Durrës in Albania at 11 in the night, and it was burning hot. We had to drive through southern Greece, northern Greece rather, until we reached to Durrës in Albania. There we rented an apartment on the 9th floor of a building with a very panoramic view of the beach and the sea. but it was an old building and the lift worked for only 4 of the 8 days, so you have to climb 9 stories high. But every night in that apartment we had a big hall and we were given talks there. I'm sure the Albanian security came to listen. And in 8 days I gave 6 lectures in Albania, again on the same topic that I'm going to be lecturing in Birmingham on the implications of the return of the Messiah. So I was preparing myself. And from Albania, I flew back to Britain in time to give the lecture in Birmingham. And again, we had a large gathering, but not as big as the first time. And I gave the lecture, it was 3.5 hours long. Very important lecture. Do please listen to it if you have the time, on the implications for mankind of the return of the Messiah, Jesus, the Son of Mary. I then flew back to Trinidad, and I'm now resting and enjoying myself in Trinidad. And I already have one visitor who is sitting here with me, an Armenian Christian who's living in Los Angeles, who's come to spend the weekend with me. And there are others who are also coming to visit me while I'm here. So I'll spend about 3 months or so here before I travel again. But let me tell you what I did while I was traveling. I was always constantly reading books whenever I had the time. I read several books during these 6 months. And even now, when I've returned to Trinidad, I'm still reading. This is a very well-written book. Oh yes, by Stanley Wolpott on Jinnah. I recommend very highly. I've read the book once already, and I'm reading it second. I hardly ever read a book twice, hardly. But this book I'm reading for a second time and taking more and more notes on Jinnah. I have more to speak on this subject. And then this is a second book that I'm reading now by Roy Sebag on money, the fitra of money. Money and fitra, money and the natural order. I'm reading this because when I resume travel in November perhaps, or maybe it's December, depending on the low fare season. I have to get the low fare because the prices of travel has now doubled up. When I return to Britain and to Europe and then I traveled elsewhere, I'll be traveling for the whole of the next year, inshallah, I hope with a wife. And I want to concentrate on this 2024, concentrate on teaching the subject of money, because we have now reached a critically dangerous stage in the development of the system of money which has come from the Western world. Tomorrow there's going to be no more paper money. I don't know whether the Darul Uloom is aware of that, or the Maulanas and the Mufti. I don't know if they probably have more important things to worry about. But tomorrow there'll be no more paper money. There'll be no more cash transactions. Everything will be digital. I call it electronic. But 25 years ago, I wrote Jerusalem in the Quran, and in that book I said it, that we are moving towards a new monetary system that will be totally electronic. How do you respond to that? They don't like your profile, they can shut down your bank account. They can freeze your bank account. No one can stop them. And you have no money, and you look for that. You deserve it because you never prepared yourself. The subject was not important to you because you got some bogus fatwa that the money you're now using is halal, whereas it is bogus, it is fraudulent, it is haram. So I'm reading this book, Money and Fitra, Money and the Natural Order, written by Roy Sebag, a businessman who studied the subject over many, many years. He looks like though he's in advanced age. And I want to organize seminars on riba. As I used to do 20 years ago in different cities. I did it in Seattle in the United States. I did it in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. I did it in Colombo in Sri Lanka. I did it in Sydney in Australia. I don't know where else I did this seminar. I did it here in Trinidad. A one-day seminar from morning until evening, teaching the subject of money, and then advising what to do to prepare yourself for this extremely dangerous stage now coming, central bank digital currency. So there'll be more about this, inshallah, soon when I organize these seminars. It'll be one-day seminar, and you'll be a limited number of people to attend, because this is not a public lecture. This is a class. I have to teach, so I have to have a limited number of people to attend, but we can repeat it in different cities at different times. So I want to teach at least 1,000 people in Britain, at least 1,000 teach the subject of money. So that when I teach you, if Allah calls me away, I leave something behind that you can teach others. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.